We have so much basil in our garden right now. It is honestly so abundant. So we're gonna actually head into the garden, pick a lot of that basil, and then what we're gonna do is we're actually going to be making a year's worth of pesto. And a year's worth of pesto to us is going to be 6 of these 16-ounce or 2-cup jars of pesto. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the recipe, which I'm going to include in the comment section down below, but we're going to take this and we're going to do it 6 times to get our full 6 jars and hopefully have enough pesto for the entire year. Now, in order to preserve this pesto, what we will be doing is just labeling on top of the cans exactly today's date, and then we will be just putting these into our freezer and taking them out the month that we need them or that we're going to be using them. And what's really great about pesto is you can use it in so many different ways, from your normal just adding it to pasta, chicken, or different types of meats, kebabs, fish, anything like that, to topping your soups with it, to adding it to your eggs, to putting it on top of bread or adding it as a dip that you might want to have on the side. We'd love to add it on top of mozzarella cheese, tomatoes, and then a little pesto on top. And then some other ways that you could use it is sauteing some vegetables. Honestly, there's literally so many different ways you can be using pesto, and it's such a great way to use up some of your basil if you're growing it in your garden, because if you're growing it well, you're gonna have a lot of it, and there's a really great way to use it. You can see here that Chris got a bunch of fresh basil from the garden. Our whole house smells so good and so delicious. What he did go ahead and do was take the basil that he clipped it all from the top. This way, it isn't actually going to stunt a lot of the growth of the basil. It will actually keep growing, especially on the nodes that are going to go to seed. This is a great way to clip back your basil in order to help it keep growing. So what he did is once he got all of those, he went inside and washed everything and then clipped back all of the pieces. So we just have little tiny stems on them. You will see that some of this is browning a bit. That's just because we were touching it and it got a little bruised, but you want to make sure that you're not bringing in any damaged pieces of basil. So definitely make sure that you're removing any of that, and you are cleaning and drying out all of your basil before starting this recipe, just so that it is nice and clean. You really do want to make sure that when you're making pesto, you're also using fresh basil, because you really should only be using dried basil when you're using it in order to add to some type of food or season types of food, but you really want to be using fresh basil when you are cooking with it. Now, if you don't have this much fresh basil on hand and you're looking to do something similar, you can substitute out some of the basil for spinach. This will give it a little bit different of a taste, or some other similar leafy greens, but we do love the taste of the pure basil pesto. It's going to be a little bit different, and you can also choose to switch up the basil that you're using with a variety of different basils as well. The only basil that I really wouldn't suggest using for pesto is going to be Thai basil. This is because it's going to have a really pungent taste to it, and it's really not going to go well with a pesto. So outside of that, you can use a lot of different types of basil, but just not using Thai basil. And if you don't like that basil taste, then you could always sub in some spinach or kale or anything like that to make up for some of it. But let's start with adding our mixture to the blender. So over here I have a Vitamix blender. You could also use a Cuisinart food processor. Either really works. We just only have a blender, so we're going to be using that today. And the first item to add to our blender is going to be 4 cups of our fresh basil. Now when you do this, you want to make sure that you're really packing it in nice, especially because it's going to use up a lot of room here. So I'm going to do 4 cups of that. So we'll add that to the blender. The next step is going to be to add your cheese. So we're going to add 1 cup of either Parmesan or Romano cheese. Really either works. You can sub it out depending on what your flavors really desire. 1 cup of extra virgin olive oil. We're going to do 2 2/3 a cup of pine nuts. Something else that you can do, because pine nuts are a more expensive nut. This I think was around $8 for this 1 6-serving bag. You can also get walnuts, and walnuts are going to just have a little bit different taste to it. You can also substitute out for different types of nuts. If you prefer a different nut like an almond or a cashew, you'll just add a little different texture and taste to your pesto, but it's a cheaper option if you do want to save some money while you're making this recipe. Then what you're going to do is we're going to add 2 tablespoons of minced garlic. You can also do around 6 cloves of garlic if you want instead. We just don't have fresh garlic on hand today, so we're going to be using this instead. Then to the mixture, we're going to top it with about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, as well as some pepper just to taste. It's really up to you. And then if you did want to add some different flavors to your pesto, like lemon or any type of other seasoning, if you want to make a spicy pesto or anything like that, you can go ahead and add it at this time as well. All right, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna push this down a little bit so it's really in there. Put our lid on and mix her up. Now, make sure when you are mixing this, especially if you're using a blender, you're only using it with the top on. You're not sticking this in, or else this could get cut up. And you want to let it get to a pretty smooth consistency. Obviously, you're gonna have maybe some cheese chunks in there, just depending on how fresh the cheese is that you're using. But otherwise, you want it to be a pretty good, smooth, but maybe chunky consistency. Once you've got into the consistency that you like, then you can go ahead and jar it. So because our blender isn't gigantic, we are doing this 6 times individually. So I'm just gonna clean this off. Using a spatula, I'll take this and pour it into our jar. When you do this, you do want to make sure that there is no air bubbles inside of the jar. This will just help with the freezing of it. So one way to do that is actually, while you're pouring it in, just mix and apply pressure on the top to remove any air bubbles throughout. Now, your goal when closing this up is making it as flush to the top as you can. This way there's no space for air to form inside of the jar. You can also top this with some oil and make up any of that additional extra space here. And then you're going to want to take a fresh can lid, close that in. And then we'll clean these off, mark the dates, and pop them in the freezer. And all I'm going to do is do this 5 more times in order to get my 6 jars. Now, if you do this and you have some extra in your blender like we do, what you can do is we actually have these smaller jars that you can put it in, and these are really great gifts for family, friends, neighbors. We actually just had a bunch of family over for a summer holiday, and we gave out some of these. We served some of our pesto, and then we gave them out to everyone that came, so it's really exciting because they got to taste it, and then they also got to bring some home to their kitchens for the future and some good recipes. Now let's talk a little bit about what this actually costs to make a year's supply of pesto. So the main ingredient here is basil, and it's also the cheapest. It comes in anywhere from $1 something to $4 if you're buying this. We use sweet basil, and with that you can get a pack of seeds that honestly is going to be way more than you need. You can also head to any grocery store and pick up basil that is already growing. You're definitely going to need to get it growing a lot more, because 1 pack is definitely not going to suffice, because you're going to need a lot more basil. The next item is going to be oil. Oil is usually going to run you anywhere from around $16 to $22. We have some really big Costco size oil bottles, so we're using that a lot of the time. It's not really costing us too much because we already have the oil in our house. But the big killer that's going to cost you the most is going to be the pine nuts. And 1 7-ounce bag that we have was costing us $10 at our grocery store, and we needed around 2 to 3 of these in order to make the full amount. So you're definitely going to need a good amount of pine nuts if you're making this, and depending on where you're getting them and the cost of pine nuts, this can be more costly. Again, you can substitute this for walnuts where you're going to be able to get a lot cheaper of a price and get a lot more. The next item on the list is cheese. You can go ahead and use a nice Parmesan cheese, as well as just using the pre-grated cheeses that you get down the aisles. Costco sells these at a pretty good price. I think the price that I found was $5 for a nice good size of cheese. And then the next item that you're going to need is just salt and pepper and anything that you're adding to taste there, which we already have at our house. So it's really going to be quite affordable in order to do this. Whereas if you were to purchase your own bottle, a much smaller bottle, not that 16-ounce jar, is going to cost you more like $8 to $12 or even upwards of that, depending on the quality. And you're never going to get that super fresh flavor. I hope this video was enjoyable, and I wish you the best of luck in your pesto making journey. If this is something you found helpful, then please comment down below and like and share. We'll see you guys again next time. Bye.